Passengers can be read through A Course in Miracles as a meditation on isolation, specialness, guilt, companionship, and the desperate egoic fear of being alone. At the core of the movie is a terrifying ACIM theme, the belief in separation. Jim wakes alone on a spaceship carrying thousands of sleeping passengers. Everything externally functions perfectly, yet psychologically he begins collapsing. Why? Because the ego cannot tolerate perceived isolation for long. ACIM would say the separated self is inherently unstable because it was built from a false premise. The ship itself becomes like the ego's world, vast, technologically impressive, carefully structured, yet emotionally empty. Jim initially tries to adapt through distraction, food, luxury, routine, entertainment, achievement, but none of it resolves the deeper ache. ACM would say, the problem is not lack of stimulation. The problem is the belief, I am alone. Then comes the central moral fracture of the film. Jim wakes Aurora. That's where the movie becomes spiritually and psychologically uncomfortable. From an ACIM perspective, this is not simply romance. It is special relationship dynamics emerging from unbearable loneliness. The ego often says, I need someone else to complete, stabilize, validate, or save me. And under that pressure, perception becomes distorted. Jim convinces himself waking Aurora is love, companionship, destiny, but underneath is unresolved fear and need. ACIM repeatedly warns that the special relationship tries to use another person as a solution to inner lack. Not because love is wrong, but because possession and joining are not the same thing. The film wisely does not let Jim's action become spiritually sanitized. Aurora's rage matters. Her autonomy was violated. That tension is important because spiritual language can sometimes bypass real-world impact. ACM distinguishes between innocence at the level of being and confused behavior at the level of perception. The ego often wants collapse. If we're all innocent, then actions don't matter. But that becomes spiritual bypass. Passengers does something more mature. It allows both truths simultaneously. Jim's loneliness is deeply human. His choice still caused harm. That complexity actually aligns better with psychological honesty than simplistic everything is illusion spirituality. There's also an ACIM layer involving projection and idealization. Before waking Aurora, Jim falls in love with an image, her recorded interviews, her personality profile, his imagined connection. He constructs an internal fantasy before meeting the actual person. The ego does this constantly. It relates less to reality than to mental projections, who people are supposed to be, how they should fulfill us, what role they play in our identity. Then real relationship begins only after the projection collapses. Aurora's awakening shatters Jim's fantasy because now another consciousness exists outside his control. That's where genuine forgiveness becomes possible. Not forgiveness as excusing behavior, but the gradual dismantling of illusion. Another ACIM theme appears through the ship malfunction itself. The Avalon is designed as a controlled paradise, perfect climate, perfect technology, perfect trajectory. Yet underneath, the system is breaking down. That resembles the ego's attempt to construct salvation through form. The ego says, if I can arrange the environment correctly, I'll finally be at peace. ACIM says peace does not come from perfected conditions because the disturbance originates in the mind's belief in separation. Even paradise becomes prison when consciousness is trapped in fear and isolation. There's also a fascinating symbolic layer around awakening. Everyone aboard the ship sleeps unconsciously, dreaming of future arrival. Jim awakens prematurely into existential awareness. In ACIM terms, awakening often first feels lonely because you begin questioning the collective dream while still identifying partly with it. But the movie also shows a danger. Awakening without healing can become distortion. Jim is conscious, but not yet free. Awareness alone does not guarantee love. That's important spiritually because many people confuse insight with transformation. ACIM would likely say, a miracle is not merely seeing the dream, but learning not to use others to escape fear within the dream. Then the film shifts towards service. As the ship deteriorates, survival requires cooperation, sacrifice, and shared purpose. The relationship slowly becomes less about possession and more about joining in function. That movement mirrors ACM's transition from special relationship to holy relationship. A holy relationship does not erase human complexity. It repurposes the relationship from mutual need management toward awakening, honesty, extension, and shared healing. And finally, the ending. Aurora chooses to remain awake rather than return to sleep. That can symbolize acceptance of direct living over suspended potentiality. ACIM constantly invites the mind into present participation rather than deferred salvation. Not one day I'll live, but awakening now. Still, the movie leaves unresolved ethical ambiguity, intentionally. And that's useful, because Passengers is not a clean spiritual allegory. It's a study of what happens when unmet fear, longing, isolation, and desire attempt to masquerade as love. ACIM would not condemn the characters, but it would gently ask, was this relationship created to complete the self or to reveal that wholeness was never absent?